Unit-1 Psychoanalysis Psychodynamic Counseling, Block-1 Psychological Interventions, Major Modalities, MPCE 0 to 3 Interventions in Counseling, Second Year, MA in Psychology, MAP, Master's Degree Programs, School of Social Sciences, SOSS, Indira Gandhi National Open University, 1.0 Introduction, Psychodynamic Therapy, or Psychoanalytic Psychotherapy as it is sometimes called, is a general name for therapeutic approaches which try to get the patient to bring to the surface their true feelings so that they can experience them and understand them. Like psychoanalysis, psychoanalytic psychotherapy uses the basic assumption that everyone has an unconscious mind. This is sometimes called the subconscious, and that feelings held in the unconscious mind are often too painful to be faced. Thus, we come up with defenses to protect us knowing about these painful feelings. An example of one of these defenses is called denial, which you may have already come across. Psychodynamic therapy assumes that these defenses have gone wrong and are causing more harm than good. That is why you have needed to seek help. It tries to unravel them, as once again, it is assumed that once you are aware of what is really going on in your mind, the feelings will not be as painful. Psychodynamic psychotherapy takes as its roots the work of Freud, who most people have heard of, and Melanie Klein, who developed the work with children, and Jung, who was a pupil of Freud's yet broke away to develop his own theories. Psychodynamics takes the approach that our past affects our present. Those who forget history are doomed to repeat it, and this is the same for an individual. Though we may repress very early experiences, thus we do not remember them, the theory is that the ID never forgets the experiences. As a child, if we had been rewarded with sweets, even today when matured and grown up we reach out for the tub of ice cream whenever we are depressed and we want cheering up. 1.1 Objectives. On successful completion of this unit, you will be able to describe the origin and evolution of psychoanalysis. Describe the origin and meaning of psychoanalysis. Define psychoanalysis. Psychodynamics. Define and understand counseling. Understand psychological counseling and its requirement, and explain the use of psychoanalytic psychodynamic counseling. 1.2 Psychodynamic psychoanalysis. 1.2.1 Freud and psychoanalysis. Sigmund Freud, a Venus neurologist, 1856 to 1939, is clearly one of the most influential writers of the 20th century, admired for his wit, intellect, and willingness to revise and improve his theories as his clinical experience grew. Freud began his practice at a time when there were fewer effective forms of treatment in most fields of medicine. Effective treatment generally depends on an understanding of the causes of a disorder, and at that time, although accurate diagnoses could sometimes be made, little was known about the causes of disease, whether physical or mental. A disorder that was particularly common during the late 1800s was hysteria, the presence of physical problems in the absence of any physical causes. Like other well-trained neurologists of his time, Freud originally used hypnosis to help his hysterical patients lose their symptoms. Then a friend, Joseph Breuer, told Freud that while under hypnosis one of his patients had recalled and understood the emotional experience that had led to the development of her symptoms, and that her symptoms had then disappeared. For a time, Freud and Breuer used this method of recapturing memories with some success. However, because some patients were not easy to hypnotize and sometimes the positive effects did not last long, Freud began to develop his method of psychoanalysis, in which the patient recaptures forgotten memories without the use of hypnosis. Freud's psychoanalytical method made him enormously influential among European clinicians. By the time he visited the United States in 1909, his reputation had already spread across the Atlantic. 1.2.2 Freud's theory of personality. Freud's theory of personality may seem complicated because they incorporate many interlocking factors, but to basic assumptions viz. Psychic determinism and the conscious-unconscious dimension underlie the theory. The principle of psychic determinism states that all behavior, whether overt, e.g. a muscle movement, or covert, for example, a thought, is caused or determined by prior mental events. The outside world and the private psychic life of the individual combine to determine all aspects of behavior. As a clinical practitioner, Freud sought to modify unwanted behavior by identifying and eliminating its psychic determinants. Freud assumed that mental events such as thoughts and fantasies varied in the ease with which they come to the individual's awareness. For example, aspects of mental life that are currently in awareness are the conscious. Mental contents that are not currently at the level of awareness but can reach that level fairly easily are the preconscious. Mental contents that can be brought to awareness only with great difficulty are the unconscious. Freud was interested mainly in how these unconscious mental contents could influence overt behavior. Freud was especially intrigued by thoughts and fantasies that seem to go underground but then reappear at the conscious level. He asserted that the level of intrapsychic conflict be a major factor in determining our awareness of particular mental events, according to Freud. The classic example of intrapsychic conflict is when a young boy desires to take his father's place in relation to his mother, but at the same time, feel love and affection for his father. Freud believed that the greater the degree of intrapsychic conflict, the greater the likelihood that the mental events connected with it would remain unconscious. The more massive the unconscious conflict, the greater the person's mental events that may remain in the unconscious. The central hypothesis of Freudian psychoanalysis is that human behavior is determined in large part by unconscious motives. Freud, 1961. Our personality and our actions, argued Freud, were in large part determined by thoughts and feelings contained in the unconscious. Repressed content of the unconscious inadvertently slips through into our words or deeds, resulting in what is commonly called as the Freudian slip. If most activities are governed by the unconscious, the individual may have limited responsibility for his or her actions. Psychoanalytic psychodynamic practitioners who use this approach tend to view psychological distress as being related to unconscious mental processes. Jacobs, 1998. Freud's contribution in regard to the mental processes, the unconscious, defense mechanisms, etc., have all been developed and expanded by others who were Freud's students or disciples. Some have followed his basic assumptions, and others have developed more independent approaches. The term psychodynamic offers a wider perspective, which encompasses the different analytical approaches. As Jacobs, 1998, suggested, psychodynamic implies that the psyche, mind, emotions, spirit self, is active, not static. These internal mental processes are dynamic forces that influence our relations with others. The structural concept of Freud's theory of personality consisted of the id, ego, and superego. The id consists of everything present at birth, including instincts. The ego is the executive of the personality because it controls the gateways to action, selects the features of the environment to which it will respond, and decides which needs will be satisfied and in which order. The superego is the internalized representative of the traditional values, ideals, and moral standards of society, and the superego strives for perfection. Under the pressure of excessive anxiety, the ego is forced to take extreme measures to relieve the pressure. These measures are called defense mechanisms because they defend the ego against anxiety. The principal defenses are repression, projection, reaction formation, intellectualization, denial, rationalization, displacement, and regression. These defense mechanisms have crept into contemporary therapy as denial and regression. Hence, someone is in denial because they are unable to accept a tragic event as having occurred and keep on stating that it had not occurred. Or 2. Take another example. A child regresses to a previous developmental stage as a way of dealing with a tragic death. In general, psychodynamics, also known as dynamic psychology, is the study of interrelationship of various parts of the mind, personality, or psyche as they relate to mental, emotional, or motivational forces, especially at the unconscious level. The mental forces involved in psychodynamics are often divided into two parts. A. Interaction of emotional forces, the interaction of the emotional and motivational forces that affect behavior and mental states, especially on a subconscious level. B. Inner forces affecting behavior, the study of the emotional and motivational forces that affect behavior and states of mind. Freud proposed that psychological energy was constant, hence, emotional changes consisted only in displacements, and that it ended to rest, point attractor, through discharge, catharsis. In mate selection psychology, psychodynamics is defined as the study of the forces, motives and energy generated by the deepest of human needs. 1.2.3 Origin of psychodynamics. The original concept of psychodynamics was developed by Sigmund Freud. Freud suggested that psychological processes are flows of psychological energy in a complex brain, establishing psychodynamics on the basis of psychological energy, which he referred to as the libido. In general, psychodynamics studies the transformations and exchanges of psychic energy within the personality. A focus in psychodynamics is the connection between the energetics of emotional states in the id, ego and superego as they relate to early childhood developments and processes. At the heart of psychological processes, according to Freud, is the ego, which is envisioned as battling with three forces, viz., the id, the superego, and the outside world. Hence, the basic psychodynamic model focuses on the dynamic interactions between the id, ego, and superego. Psychodynamics, subsequently, attempts to explain or interpret behavior or mental states in terms of innate emotional forces or processes. 1.2.4 History of psychodynamics. Psychodynamics was initially developed by Sigmund Freud, Carl Jung, Alfred Adler, and Melanie Klein. By the mid-1940s and into the 1950s, the general application of the psychodynamics theory had been well established. In his 1988 book Introduction to Psychodynamics, A New Synthesis, psychiatrist Murthy J. Horowitz states that his own interest and fascination with psychodynamics began during the 1950s when he heard Ralph Greenson, a popular local psychoanalyst who spoke to the public on topics such as people who hate, and also his speeches on the radio at UCLA. In his radio discussion, according to Horowitz, he vividly described neurotic behavior and unconscious mental processes and linked psychodynamics theory directly to everyday life. In the 1950s, American psychiatrist Eric Berne built on Freud's psychodynamic model, particularly that of the ego states, to develop a psychology of human interactions called transactional analysis, which, according to physician James R. Allen, is a cognitive behavioral approach to treatment, and that it is a very effective way of dealing with internal models of self and others as well as other psychodynamic issues. The theory was popularized in the 1964 book Games People Play. 1.3 Meaning of psychodynamics. 1. Psychodynamics is the systematic study and theory of the psychological forces that underlie human behavior, emphasizing the interplay between unconscious and conscious motivation. 2. The psychology of mental or emotional forces or processes developing, especially in early childhood, and their effects on behavior and mental states. 3. Explanation or interpretation, as of behavior or mental states, in terms of mental or emotional forces or processes. 4. Motivational forces acting especially at the unconscious level. 1.3.1 Definition of psychodynamics. According to the American psychologist Calvin S. Hall, from his 1954 primer in Freudian Psychology, the definition of psychodynamics is as given below. A dynamic psychology is one that studies the transformations and exchanges of energy within the personality. This was Freud's greatest achievement, and as one of the greatest achievements in modern science, it is certainly crucial in the history of psychology. In 1930s, Freud's daughter Anna Freud began to apply Freud's psychodynamic theories of the ego to the study of parent-child attachment, and especially deprivation, and in doing so developed ego psychology. 1.3.2 Freudian psychodynamics. According to Freud, the ego is seen as battling with three forces: the id, the super ego, and the outside world. In his writings about the engines of human behavior, Freud used the German word idea, a word that can be translated into English as either instinct or drive. 1.3.3 Jungian Psychodynamics. A Swiss psychiatrist, Carl Jung, in his first book, published in the year 1907, entitled Psychology of Dementia Praecox, upheld the Freudian psychodynamic viewpoint, although with some reservation. Carl Jung's contribution in psychodynamic psychology includes the following. 1. The psyche tends toward wholeness. 2. The self is composed of the ego, the personal unconscious, the collective unconscious, and the archetypes. 3. Archetypes are composed of dynamic tensions and arise spontaneously in the individual and collective psyche. Archetypes are autonomous energies common to the human species. They give the psyche its dynamic properties and help organize it. 4. The transcendent function. The emergence of the third resolves the split between dynamic polar tensions within the archetypal structure. 5. The recognition of the spiritual dimension of the human psyche. 6. Recognition of the multiplicity of psyche and psychic life. Psychodynamic therapy is a general name for therapeutic approaches which try to get the patient to bring to the surface their true feelings so that they can experience them and understand them. Like psychoanalysis, psychodynamic psychotherapy uses the basic assumption that everyone has an unconscious mind, and that feeling held in the unconscious mind are often too painful to be faced. Thus we come up with defenses to protect us from becoming aware of these painful feelings. Psychodynamic therapy assumes that these defenses have gone wrong and are causing more harm than good. That is why you have needed to seek help. It tries to unravel them, as once again, it is assumed that once you are aware of what is really going on in your mind, feeding will not be as painful. 1.3.4 Meaning of psychodynamic counseling. Psychodynamic counseling is based on acceptance, empathy, and understanding, with an emphasis on developing a good working alliance that fosters trust. The counselor takes account of the real world of the client, including the impact of trauma, cultural difference, sexual orientation, disability, and social context. Psychodynamic counseling places more emphasis on the influence of past experience on the development of current behavior, mediated in part through unconscious processes. It is influenced by object relations theory, that is, by the idea that previous relationships leave lasting traces which affect self-esteem and may result in maladaptive patterns of behavior. Psychodynamic counseling skills and theory can be valuable in many working and social environments. The insight and understanding about human functions gained from psychoanalytic theory can enhance the life of the counselor as well as the client, and can be put to a variety of good uses. 1.3.5 Meaning of psychodynamic theory. Psychodynamic psychotherapy is derived from psychoanalysis and is based on a number of key analytical concepts. These include Freud's ideas about psychosexual development, defense mechanisms, free association as the method of recall, and the therapeutic techniques of interpretation, including that of transference, defenses, and dreams. Such therapy usually involves once-weekly 50-minute sessions, the length of treatment varying between 3 months and 2 years. The long-term aim of such therapy is twofold: symptom relief and personality change. Psychodynamic psychotherapy is classically indicated in the treatment of unresolved conflicts in early life, as might be found in non-psychotic and personality disorders. but to date there is a lack of convincing evidence concerning its superiority over other forms of treatment. Psychodynamic theory is based on the premise that human behavior and relationships are shaped by conscious and unconscious influences. Psychodynamic therapies, which are sometimes used to treat depressed persons, focus on resolving the patient's conflicted feelings. These therapies are often reserved until the depressive symptoms are significantly improved. Psychodynamic counseling places more emphasis on the influence of past experience on the development of current behavior, mediated in part through unconscious processes. It is influenced by object relations theory, that is, by the idea that previous relationships leave lasting traces which affect self-esteem and may result in maladaptive patterns of behavior. 1.3.6 Psychological counseling. Counseling is as old as society itself. In everyday life, we find counseling goes on at many levels in a family setup. Parents counsel their children, in society doctors counsel patients, lawyers their clients, and teachers their students. There is no limit to the problems on which counseling can be offered nor to the persons who can render this help. Counseling is the core of the guidance program and is considered to be its most intimate and vital part. 1.3.7 Definition of professional counseling. What counseling is, especially the professional counseling, in its present form, which is a recent development. Educational institutions, industries, and business establishments are becoming increasingly interpersonal in their relationships. It is believed where no counsel is, the people fall. But in the multitude of counselors, there is safety. No wonder counseling is being recognized as an important technique of guidance. Counseling has been understood and defined in a number of ways. The Webster's Dictionary defines counseling as consultation, mutual interchange of opinions, deliberating together. Wren says, counseling is a dynamic and purposeful relationship between two people who approach a mutually defined problem with mutual consideration of each other, to the end that the younger or less mature or more troubled of the two is aided to a self-determined resolution of his problem. Pepinski and Pepinski feel that counseling relationship refers to the interaction, which occurs between two individuals called the counselor and the client, 2 takes place within a professional setting, and 3 is initiated and maintained as a means of facilitating changes in the behavior of the client. The counseling relationship develops from the interaction between two individuals, one a professionally trained worker and the other a person who seeks his services. Hahn and MacLean define counseling as a process which takes place in a one-to-one relationship between an individual beset by problems with which he cannot cope alone and a professional worker whose training and experience have qualified him to help others reach solutions to various types of personal difficulties. An analysis of the above viewpoints will reveal the major elements of counseling. Counseling involves two individuals, that is, one seeking help and the other, a professional, trained person, who can help the first. There should be a relationship of mutual respect between the two individuals. The counselor should be friendly and cooperative, and the counselee should have trust and confidence in the counselor. The aim of counseling is to help a student form a decision, make a choice, or find a direction at some important fork in the road, such as that of planning a life career, a program in college or university, or a campaign to obtain employment. It helps the counselee acquire independence and develop a sense of responsibility. It helps him explore and utilize his potentialities and actualize himself. It is more than advice giving. The progress comes through the thinking that a person with a problem does for himself rather than through solutions suggested by the counselors. It involves something more than the solution to an immediate problem. Its function is to produce changes in the individual that will enable him to extricate himself from his immediate difficulties. It concerns itself with attitudes as well as action. Emotional rather than purely intellectual attitudes are the raw material of the counseling, have their place in the counseling process. But it is the emotionalized feelings which are most important. 1.3.8 Counseling and Psychotherapy. Differences between psychotherapy and counseling. Psychotherapy has roots in Freudian psychodynamics, so that a medical aspect to the training was involved in the past, which lends it an air of respectability. The training period for psychotherapy is long and involved working with real clients under supervision. The courses in counseling have training shorter and less intensive. Also, psychotherapy requires a long period of self-analysis. Psychotherapy focuses on in-depth consideration of past issues as compared to psychotherapy. Counseling courses are short, cheaper and more accessible courses, and they are very inclusive. Working mothers, part-time workers, the unemployed, etc. can normally find some way to take some form of counseling course. Psychotherapy involves working in greater depth than counseling, that clients see their therapist more frequently and for a long period of time. By contrast, counseling takes place over a shorter period of time. Counseling is seen to be about short-term help, and psychotherapy about longer term. The focus in psychotherapy is on the past causes of the issues, whereas the focus of counseling is in regard to the present issues. Psychotherapy is concerned with some type of deeper personality change, but counseling is concerned with helping individuals develop their full coping potential in regards to some particular issue. The setting of the treatment in counseling session often takes place in a number of non-medical settings such as an office or small therapy center, or even in the therapist's flat. Whereas psychotherapy is often thought of as taking place in a more medical setting, perhaps a clinic or hospital, psychotherapy is better for those who find it difficult to open up. Counseling, according to Morganes, is a process in which the therapist is there as a tour guide for the client, refocusing them in a process that they are otherwise quite good at exploring themselves. Similarities between psychotherapy and counseling. The aims of both are similar. Both can be seen as an attempt to allow the person to build up resources to live in more healthy, meaningful, and satisfying ways, and to develop self-awareness. Also, a high degree of respect for the autonomy of the client is a basic principle in both counseling and psychotherapy. Both counseling and psychotherapy involve clear contracts between the therapist and the client as to what the aims are and the roles involved. Both counseling and psychotherapy require the therapist to have highly developed skills. Counseling and psychotherapy are different. Although the psychotherapist uses counseling as one of the techniques of treatment, psychotherapy is usually concerned with individuals whose behavior is neurotic. While it deals with repressed individuals, counseling is concerned with normal anxieties. Psychotherapy operates in a medical setting, whereas counseling operates in an educational environment. The psychotherapist uses play therapy, psychodrama, and sociodrama as techniques. In counseling, such techniques are used as can be employed in educational institutions and individual establishments. Psychotherapy is deeper in scope, whereas counseling has wider implications. A counselor cannot be a psychotherapist, but a psychotherapist, being better and specially qualified, can be a counselor. 1.3.9 Classification of counseling. Generally, categorization of counseling is based on the nature and character of situation, age group, community, society, etc. There are so many classification of counseling like students counseling, educational counseling, interpersonal and intrapersonal counseling, adolescent counseling, social counseling, marriage counseling, premarital counseling, counseling related to any kind of behavior, habits and attitudes, career counseling, counseling related to social problems, industrial counseling, management counseling, counseling of life, threatening factors. etc. So the subject of counseling is like big ocean. No definite definition and a single, tested approach can be applied for all cases. It is heterogeneous in nature. Every case is different, but approach can be common in most of the cases. Reasons are not same for the same cases. Why? Man is a social animal with variable natures. attitudes, aptitudes, aspirations, reactions, different responsive nature. It is different from person to person. So no single approach and solutions can be offered. Every case has to be studied separately and to be dealt carefully with deeper and committed insight. Counseling can thus be classified according to the nature of the problem, the complexity of treatment, and the competence of the counselor. Some writers classify counseling in terms of several factors. Lloyd Jones and Smith, for example, describe various levels of counseling with respect to the depth of the problem, length of contact, degree of need, and the skill of the counselor. At the surface level is the counseling offered when the student wishes only some item of information. The counseling given may be casual, it is brief, and it may be superficial in that it is not extensive or intensive. The need for help is important even, though slight, and the relationship maintained through the brief contact should not be less than that maintained during the long counseling session. Counseling at the next level requires a more prolonged contact because the counselee needs more of complicated information. He may, for example, wish assistance in planning a program of study for a 2 or a 4-year period. As the problems become complicated and as an intensive study of the case is required, and more specialized help is needed, counseling at deeper levels becomes necessary. When the student is seriously disturbed, therapeutic counseling may be needed. Williamson feels that counseling is needed not only for helping individuals to gain insight into their emotional conflicts but also for helping them with problems stemming from lack of information, such as information about vocational aptitudes and interests or about work opportunities, so that they may conduct their future adjustments in such a way that a minimum of maladaptive repressions occur. 1st March 2010 Goals of Counseling. Counseling goals may be simply classified in terms of counselor goals and the client goals or the immediate, intermediate, or long-range goals of therapy. Regardless of how one chooses to classify the goals, counseling, like all other meaningful activities, must be goal-driven, have a purpose, or seek an objective. Broadly speaking, counseling goals may be separated into following categories: developmental goals, wherein client is assisted in meeting his/her anticipated human growth and development; preventive goals, enhancement goals, remedial goals, exploratory goals, reinforcement goals, cognitive goals, psychological goals, physiological goals. 1st March 2011 Principles of Counseling. Relationship between the counselor and counseling is based on prevalent amount of trust, confidence, and openness. Here the counselor will be helping the client to find his existent potentialities. Respect. This is a very important principle of counseling. The counselor must respect the client and whatever he or she is expressing with concern, respect and understanding, transparency and understanding in communication. The counselor must be transparent and must not say something while thinking the opposite. Every attempt should be made by the counselor to understand whatever is being expressed by the client with genuine interest and concern, knowing the counselor, understanding him from his situation. This is yet another important principle. In this, the counselor is expected to know the client completely in terms of the facts gathered during interview and also view him and his problems from the situation that the client faces. Availability. After giving an appointment at a particular time, the counselor should never miss the appointment. In case there is an emergency and the appointment cannot be kept up, the counselor must inform the client ahead in advance and apologize for the cancellation. Privacy. Whatever is being told by the client has to be considered as completely private, and at no time these information should be conveyed to anyone without the clear permission from the client. Positive approach and recognizing client's potentiality. The counselor must have a positive approach towards the client and his or her problems and should recognize the potentialities that the client has, focusing on follow-up specifications, trustworthy and no misrepresentation. Blackmail. Constant regular consultation is essential. 1st March 2012 Steps in Counseling. The action of transition of theories into action is referred to as counseling process. A process usually specified by a sequence of interaction of steps. Hackney and Cormier, 1996, identified the stages as follows: relation establishment, problem identification and exploration, planning for problem solving, solution application and termination. 1.4 The situation in which counseling is required. The following are some of the situations in which counseling is needed. 1. When the student needs not only reliable information but an interested interpretation of such information as meets his own personal difficulties. 2. When the student needs a wise, sympathetic listener with broader experience than his own, to whom he can recount his difficulties and from whom he may gain suggestions regarding his own proposed plan of action. 3. When the counselor has access to facilities for helping in the solution of a student's problem. 4. When the student is unaware that he has a certain problem but, for his best development, must be aroused to a consciousness of that problem. 5. When the student is aware of a problem and of the strain and difficulty it is causing, but is unable to define and understand it, and is unable to cope with it independently, the psychoanalytical context. Then, reducing tension becomes a major goal of counseling. Because personality conflict is present, all people, nearly everyone can benefit from professional counseling. Inasmuch the psychoanalytical approach requires insights that in turn rely on openness and self-disclosure, psychoanalytic theory usually views the client as a person in need of assistance in restructuring his/her personality. The counselor in the role of expert will facilitate or direct this restructuring. The client will be encouraged to talk freely, to disclose unpleasant, difficult, or embarrassing thoughts. The counselor will provide interpretation as appropriate, attempting to increase client insights. This in turn may lead the client to work through the unconscious and eventually achieve the ability to cope realistically with the demands of the client's world and society as a whole. In this process, among the techniques the psychoanalytic counselor may employ projective tests, play therapy, dream analysis, and free association, all of which require special training for the counselor, usually available only at the doctoral level. 1.5 Summary. We have discussed the theoretical basis and origin of psychoanalysis and psychodynamics and its uses in counseling, role and goals of counseling. The clear meaning and definition of psychoanalytic psychodynamic counseling. The students may find the theoretical background helpful to get the clear understanding of counseling in psychoanalytic context. Thank you. Subscribe to our channel for more updates, and we will see you with the next chapter.